I'm Jake with the Fireside Tattoo Network, and welcome to another episode of Fireside Technique. You know, if you've been tattooing for any period of time, you have probably been asked by a client or a potential client whether you can cover a dark tattoo with a light tattoo, or whether light ink can cover dark ink. A lot of times it comes in the form of, hey, can you cover my ex's name just by mixing up a skin tone that's like mine and putting it right over the name? And of course we know that you can't do that. That idea, I think, comes from people believe that when we punch holes in skin and we lay ink in the skin, we're laying it on top of the previous layer of ink. Like there's an old tattoo and we're putting the new tattoo on top of it. And that's not actually what's happening. What's really happening is that these particles of ink are kind of being pushed into the skin, and they all live in the dermis there together. And so optically, they kind of commingle or intermingle, and then we blend them with our eyes, right? So we can't put light colors over dark colors and get rid of them, but we can affect them to a certain extent. Sometimes we can push them back 10, 20%. It may look on the front end like we're pushing them back 50 or 60% whenever the tattoo is fresh, but when it heals, the old tattoo tends to make its way back through, and that's why it takes a true professional to master cover-ups. It has a lot to do with planning. It has a lot to do with kind of tricking the eye into saying, hey, look at me over here and ignore this over here. So I did have an opportunity recently, or a while back now, to kind of put this to the test, though. This idea of covering dark inks with light inks. I have a good friend that I've known for many years that had an older tattoo of mine on his forearm, and we spend a lot of time hanging out, sitting at the bars, and he's sitting on the counter a lot with his arm up on the counter, and I was always bothered by the tattoo just because it looked chaotic to me. The problem was I had these really bold reds, these really strong, rich colors in the background that were jumping forward, and they were swallowing up my foreground image. They just were making everything look chaotic. I didn't know where to look when I looked at it, especially looking at the healed tattoo through arm hair. I would just find myself staring at it and saying, I need to do something about that. And so my solution, or my potential solution, I thought, was going to be to try to knock back some of those really bold, warm tones in the background. So that's what I tried to do, and luckily I filmed it, and we made a technique episode out of it. So check it out, and I hope you get something from it. I think it's a pretty good episode. All right, so here is the original tattoo, and you can see down there on the forearm what I was talking about, how those reds are just too warm. That's not the only issue. There are design issues as well, meaning that there are a lot of patterns, a lot of images, a lot of shapes that are competing. But what I'm going to do here is try to establish a hierarchy. And since what I see the most is the turtle on the forearm, that's what I want to focus on. So let's go ahead and get started. So before I go in and try to knock those reds back, I'm going to do a handful of other things that I think will help to establish that hierarchy. First thing I'm going to do is to push contrast by putting my darkest darks in the turtle in the foreground, and I'm going to start with the edges. I'm building up those lines on the outside edges just to kind of lift that thing forward a little bit. And a lot of times, you know, just bumping through those edges and hitting your blacks is enough, but it's also a little bit deceptive. You know, what you're seeing right now as I line the head here and it looks like it jumps forward is that we're looking at fresh black on top of multiple year old color. So of course it looks a lot bolder, but once that settles in, you're going to lose some of that effect. So while it's helpful to go through and push these edges and push this contrast, you have to keep in mind that it is going to settle in a little bit, and that alone is probably not going to be enough to solve the problem. Going in and just kind of hitting some of my darks in the textures of the face here. I want to get my greatest contrast in the turtle. Now I'm going through and I'm starting to shade out on the shadow side a little bit. Another thing that I had noticed as I was working on it was that the light source was a little bit unclear to me. For instance, there's a strong shadow in the neck of the turtle, but it doesn't really translate to, say, like his chin or even to that back flipper, his back leg, or whatever you call them on turtles, it seems like his head should be casting a shadow on that back flipper, and it's not. There's some light that's kind of jumping forward, and it just makes the shapes look a little bit off. It looks, it's a little bit confusing. So I'm going to go through and kind of reinforce those shapes, and I'm just kind of thinking like, all right, this head, this neck is just kind of a cylinder. So if I were to shine a light coming from the left side of the cylinder, how would that light, or how would the cylinder respond to that? And that's something that if you've been through our foundations course, that we really focus on a lot, is breaking things down mentally into simple shapes, and then learning how light reveals those shapes, so that you can take most any image, break it down into those simpler shapes, and make them make sense. I think it's vital, probably the single most important element in good drawing to me. Now, I didn't want to just go straight from black into that aged kind of green, so I mixed up a little bit of a deeper green and tried to make that transition a little bit smoother. I don't want to go through and rework the entire turtle, but I do want the transitions to look smooth. I want it to look like that they could have been done at the same time. And sometimes if you're really paying attention, you can learn to use some of those aged, really settled in inks to your areas to your advantage. If you really punch some bold areas and then make a smooth transition from those dark, bold areas into the older stuff, it provides sometimes a pretty nice contrast. Same thing here as I get into the bottom of the shell, really trying to push some blacks, make sure that I'm getting a lot of strong contrast. My darkest darks and my lightest lights are in the turtle, and or will be in the turtle, and that'll kind of help it to draw more attention. And then as I go through and I try to knock back the background, those things together, I'm hoping will do the trick. Just playing a little bit with the edges right there, and trying to make sure that my transitions and my edges are nice and smooth. You can see there that we're already kind of starting to make some more sense out of the turtle. He's pushing forward a little bit. Like I said, it's a little bit deceptive because he's fresh and everything else is really healed and settled in, but we're getting there. Just trying to reinforce a few of those textures. Pulling more textures also will draw some attention, and trying to emphasize the texture in the turtle and then de-emphasize the textures in the background is just another thing that I'm hoping will kind of push that turtle forward. All right, and as we cut to a wide shot here, the upper arm, my work is only from the band of sharks down. The upper arm was actually done by our former co-host David Evans back in the early 90s, I would assume, and that is classic David Evans right there. He was one of the pioneers of custom tattooing in Memphis, and all those little textures and clouds and things like that I would recognize from a mile away. I've seen them for so long. Okay, so this stingray or manta ray that's up on the bicep there, it had settled in a lot too, and I kind of like the light blue transition where I pulled from David's existing waves down into the warm tones at the bottom. I like that light blue, and I like how it's settled in over the years. It kind of provides a little relief for the eye, and so I think to reinforce that, I wanted to go in and push that the wing of the stingray forward by making it a lot darker. It also gives me a nice, interesting shape to lay right across the bicep there to draw some attention, and to and like I say, to reinforce the light areas that sit behind it. I'm just trying to think about shapes, just trying to go through and say, all right, where could I use some darker darks? Where can I punch this? What can I leave alone to drop back? And I'm always kind of getting back away from the piece, squinting my eye, especially in something like this where there's so many competing images anyways. There's so many elements that are all about the same size, and a lot of textures and a lot of patterns. I just want to simplify wherever I can and give some relief for the eye. You can see how that wing is already kind of pushing forward a little bit there up on the bicep. All right, now don't be mad at me, but my camera cut out while I actually went over those reds, which was the focus of the entire piece, or the entire video. But you can see that I went over it with kind of a golden yellow. I think I've used like Eternal's golden yellow or maybe caramel or something like that. And I tried to just go over the entire thing and simplify it. And now what I'm doing is I'm coming back with my lightest lights and putting them on the light side of the turtle, just to push that contrast and create a little more texture, and just one last ditch effort to kind of pull that head forward a little bit, because I know that as this thing settles in, some of those reds are going to come back out in the background, and I want to use all of the elements, all the tools in my toolbox to try to get some separation here. If you remember, whenever when the video first started, there were some really stark bands of red to yellow in that background, and I think they were too stark. They really brought brought that background forward. So whenever I went through with those kind of orangey golden yellows, I tried to go over the entire thing. And there you can see it. This is fresh right after I finished it, and you can see that, it looks like it knocked the red back completely, but we all know that that's deceptive. You know that red is going to come back out a little bit, but in this video, at least, it looks like when it's fresh that the turtle jumps out. It looks like that it worked well. So now let's take a look. I'll turn around his arm first. I didn't do much in the back, but now let's take a look at about 6 or 7 months later, healed 6 or 7 months, and here it is. So you can see those reds did come back through, but not as bold as I might have expected. I think the combination of really pushing my darks and pushing my contrast, my darks and lights in the turtle, and trying to knock those reds back together, kind of served the purpose. I think it worked. As a matter of fact, I'll say that it worked better than I expected it to. I really didn't know what to expect over months and months. I knew that it would look fine as soon as I finished it. But I'm pretty happy with how that transition in the background kind of came together. It's a lot less stark. I knocked it back from a value standpoint. I knocked it back from a color intensity standpoint, which I'm pretty happy with. And then here are the two together. And you can see this was before I had started it on the left-hand side, and then the 6 or 7 months healed on the right-hand side. And so it looks like it worked pretty well to me. Now, in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, how much of that red pulls back out, how much of those darks in the turtle the more that those kind of mute out, does the turtle fall back in the distance? Well, time will tell. Just, subscribe to our mailing list, and I'll shoot you a 20-year healed photo. Hey, thanks as always for supporting what we do. Be sure to go to tattooimprovement.com and sign up for our mailing list. Click thumbs up and leave a comment, unless you don't like the video, and then, just turn it off. Have a good day.